Good morning. It is September 1, and it feels like September 1 in Northern Ohio. It has certain fall feels. Of course, that's tempting us with something that's not going to happen for a while yet. Next week, we return to what might be more closely akin to summer. Online today, we've got Dr. David Gardner, Dr. Tyler Carr, and Dr. David Shetlar. Dr. Carr, take it away.
Hey everybody, glad to be here today. I know we're right in the middle of that time where people are wanting to put seed out. We've been talking a lot about turf grass establishment from seed. Dr. Nangle talked last week about planting and mulching. And so the next step is irrigation. So why do we irrigate? Because the in order for the seed to germinate, it needs to absorb water. That's the first step before the seed can germinate. And once it absorbs that water, a process we call imbibition, it's irreversible. And so it must maintain adequate moisture for the seed to germinate and establish. So how do we irrigate, or how should we irrigate? And in general, we just don't want the seed to dry out. Deep irrigation cycles, like we typically recommend for established lawns, they're not really beneficial because the seed's at the soil surface. And if we over irrigate, we can increase incidence for disease activity, and also we can have washing of that seed, so some lateral movement of that seed, and that's not what we want. That can leave some bare spots in our areas. So in general, we want to have some frequent irrigation with short run times. And I know you're probably thinking, like, let's just cut to the chase. How many times should I water per day, and for how many minutes? It's not that easy. I recommend replacing 125% of ET across a minimum of 4 events per day. That kind of covers our basis. What do I mean by that? ET is evapotranspiration. That's how much water we're predicted to lose. I know seeds aren't really a proxy for ET, because it's not transpiring, but it's a unit of measurement we have that's related to water, and it's in inches. So today in Columbus, we're predicted to lose about, I think I saw 0.19 inches from ET. 125% of that is 0.24 inches, so about a quarter of an inch. And that's how much water we would need to apply today, like not all at once, over multiple irrigation events. Um, so how many minutes you'll run your irrigation system will be dependent on your precipitation rate. So in this blog post that I'm gonna post here this weekend or early next week, I'm gonna outline all this math so it's easier to follow along. Um, but like I said, it's related to your output of your irrigation system. That's typically reported in inches per hour. We call this the precipitation rate. Your irrigation heads and nozzles are gonna really dictate this. Our spray nozzles are gonna put out more water than our rotors. And audit's the best way to calculate this. I'll outline this in the blog post as well. Kind of an easy way to do this is take some old tuna cans if you're into eating tuna or your cat does, and run your irrigation system for an hour and measure how much water has been put out. That can give you how many inches per hour been put out. So let's say you put out zero point 0.6 or zero point 0.6 inches of water per hour. That is 0.01 inches per minute. And to put out 0.24 inches of water, you need to irrigate for 24 minutes. Um, so I would probably split that up into 4 irrigation cycles for 6 minutes apiece, or 6 cycles for 4 minutes apiece. Your irrigation controller is going to kind of dictate the maximum amount of irrigation cycles you can run in a day. And then you're just going to need to adjust that for different ET values. And in that post, again, I'll give you some resources to find those ET values to dial in your irrigation, because we're in many cases we over irrigate during establishment. I've talked with some folks that have predicted that we're putting out probably somewhere around 2.5 to 3 inches, 2 to 3 inches of water per week, which is pretty high. Um, and so then once that seed has started to germinate and we're starting to see some growth there, we can start backing our irrigation down maybe to 2 times a day. I'd like to start seeing irrigation down to 1 time per day by the time you start mowing. So I know next week Pam Sherritt's going to talk about mowing. And then we'll talk about nitrogen fertilization. But with it being hot, we need to keep water on this seed, and we really don't want pathogen development. So that's what I have. Thanks, guys. Be on the lookout for that blog post.
Thank you, Dr. Carr. Dr. Shetlar, take it away.
Okay, let's see. I'm going to try to get my screen shared here. We're kind of in the end of the summer doldrums and in the buggy world. It's still too early for the white grub damage to show up, but I am getting some pictures. Some people are noticing, after that experience a couple of years ago with the fall armyworm. I've had a couple of golf course superintendents that have noticed some egg masses on their tee markers or flags or other areas. Usually it's just like one egg mass. And indeed, the fall armyworm adults are in their second generation here in Ohio. They did arrive in late July, so they've had enough time in August to have one generation. But what I wanted to talk about today, and I don't think there's going to be enough fall armyworms to cause any significant damage anywhere. Hopefully, if you're on a golf course, especially where you can't tolerate low populations of fall armyworm, which actually can show up as black cutworm damage on greens and tees. Hopefully, if you've applied your Soloprin, you should be protected from that damage. What I do want to talk about are a couple of strange critters that typically occur at this time of the year on golf courses, specifically. The first one is the seed corn beetle. The seed corn beetle is a little ground beetle that has larvae that feed on germinating seeds. And normally this is a pest in field crops in the springtime, and germinating corn, germinating soybeans, and things like that. For some reason, when the new adults emerge, they look for places to overwinter, and for some reason they seem to be attracted to our greens and tees on golf course. The females, which are distinctively, you can see sort of a yellowish brown color with these two distinctive stripes on them and two distinctive black spots on the pronotum. For some reason, they're attracted to odors that are coming from the greens. They dig in during the nighttime when they're flying, and the next morning you can find anywhere from a couple of the mounds of soil to hundreds of these little mounds of soil. Obviously, you're going to mow those off in the morning mowing. That should be the end of it until maybe the next day when some more of them will show up. They don't seem to cause any real damage. They don't lay eggs in there. There's no seed supposedly germinating. I have associated them several times with what appears to be maybe the beginnings of and so maybe some of the odors that are coming out, the sort of sulfur odors that come out when black layer is formed. So you might want to do a soil probe. You'll probably need to go down maybe 6 to 8 inches, pull that out and sniff of it and see if you've got maybe evidence of some anaerobic respiration. It'll smell kind of a stinky, sulfury kind of a smell. Not much you could do about these. We used to use Dursban. We would apply Dursban during that period. That would seem to knock out the adults. Dursban or chlorpyrifos is getting difficult to find. The other one that occurs right now, this really occurred about a week and a half ago when we did have a significant rain front that came through. The little turfgrass ant colonies have produced new potential queens. We call them potential queens because until they have established an actual colony, at which time they would be fully developed queens, really trying to establish colonies. So after a mating flight, usually in the evening, the day after a rainfall event, and I don't think we're going to get a rainfall event until maybe the end of next week, but if we get one, we might see another flight of these queens. But basically, the queens are much larger than the regular workers. They're about 5 times the size of the regular workers. After a mating flight, those potential queens will dig in, and as you can see, it's almost another soil mound about the size of the seed corn beetle soil mound. They'll dig into the turf and hang out there, and they will try to establish a colony, but most of them fail. There's other ants in the area that will attack them and say, no, this is our territory. But again, this can be a real nuisance. Usually one-time events. Like I said, the night after a rainfall event, the next morning you might have anywhere from a couple of to dozens of these on the green. Again, brush them off or mow them off, and there shouldn't be any more the next day. Do you need to treat those ants? And the answer for that is, again, on greens and teas, they're just not successful. Okay, that's what I've got in the buggy world this week.
Thanks, Dave. I'm sure the product placement will get a response as well somewhere, but nicely done. Sorry, you didn't fall off the seat with your bug in your throat. Okay. Dr. Gardner, all things weed related. Actually, sorry, before we go, Dr. Gardner, Dave, I had a superintendent when I was in Chicago and down in Southern Illinois at the time, and he was pretty aggressive with the seed corn beetle treatments. He would have applied materials on a 2-week rotation, and it was 3 applications. And I don't know whether it was legal or not, but he reckoned it was pretty effective. But
yeah, and you can, if you don't have access to chlorpyrifos or Dursban, every other week application of something like pyrethroid, and you can legally get by it by, picking bifenthrin this week and do Delta Meath or Delta Guard the next week, and you could rotate different pyrethroids
right.
and get your 3 apps in and not go counter to the label.
Right, there you go. Dr. Gardner.
Ed, how you doing? Okay.
Good. Technical difficulties.
All right, so at this point, we still see a lot of crabgrass, but at least at the OTF Center where I do my research, crabgrass has stopped growing for about 2 weeks now. And it will persist, try to produce seed heads for another couple of weeks, and then it will start to turn brown, and then it will, fade away. And so my point is that it's kind of a judgment call, but, not a lot of people are out trying to spray herbicides on crabgrass at this point, because it's an annual. It's going to kind of do its thing for the next couple of weeks, and then it's going to go away. That said, you should keep it mowed to try to keep the seed head production down. Okay. But one weed that you could still concern yourself with, because it's a perennial, is yellow nutsedge, of course. And there are a variety of different herbicides that are on the market. I think for the most part, people are still using either halosulfuron or sulfentrazone, though I would say that imazasulfuron and pyrimisulfan are also good options for that. But again, since sedges are perennials, if you see them, it's still an appropriate time to hit them. Other weeds, you remember these that you might have seen in the springtime? If you had difficulty controlling them, it's because they tend to be hard to control with post-emergence herbicides after wintertime. So if you had a lot of issues with winter annuals this last year, this is about the time that you would consider putting out a pre-emergence herbicide. I've done that on some plots and with great success. Now, the products that you would use are the same things that you would use for crabgrass control. So anything that contains pendimethalin or prodiamine, or preferably dithiopyr, just because if you look at that label, it's got a more expansive list of broadleaf weeds that it controls. And again, the pre-emerge control can be more effective than attempting to control post-emergence when winter annuals or seedlings. And that's definitely going to be better than when you try to control those the following spring. Now, I've gotten a couple of emails in the last few weeks about this guy. Okay, so this is Japanese stiltgrass, Microstygium, which is an occasional pest that garners some attention. It's actually related to crabgrass, and it's an annual. So we do have quite a few options for controlling this, both pre and post-emerge. But when you see it out on a turf surface, it does definitely look a lot different than some of our other grassy weed species. Kind of a nice bright midrib with it, sort of almost like the paspalums, really. But if you see this particular species, okay, you can control it post-emergence with phenoxyprop. Now, phenoxyprop is kind of a strange compound in that if you apply it within 3 weeks of 2,4-D or MCPP, I can't remember which one activates the other, but it's generally a bad idea. I say that because a lot of people will be using those two active ingredients to control broadleaf weeds this fall. So just be cognizant of that there is that interaction there that is a little bit weird. But maybe the better strategy would be to figure out where those areas are, and next spring, go out with pendimethalin, prodiamine, or dithiopyr and attempt to control that pre-emergence. Short and sweet. Ed, that's what I have for this week.
Thank you, Dr. Gardner.
David, I was out mowing my lawn day before yesterday, and I noticed one of the lawn care companies had wheeled up to my neighbor's, and after he left, I smelled the very distinctive odor of a three-way herbicide, and I thought, well, okay, it's cool this week, but I did want to mention that next week we're supposed to be in the 90s. And what would you think of applying a three-way during the 90-degree weather?
Yeah, it's not necessarily a great idea to do it at that point. You know, there may be a little bit of injury to the turf grass, but really the main thing is that even with the amine formulations, when you spray when it's that hot, you tend to lose a lot of it to the atmosphere. In other words, you know, like when you spray, you go back 15 minutes later and, you know, the surface is totally dry, which means you had 15 minutes to get the herbicide into the plant, which is usually not enough time. And so even if you're using great herbicides, the control, if you use them in hot weather, can actually be not so good. Plus, if there's any ornamentals in the area, there's more of a chance that you're going to control them rather than the weeds in the turf grass. So yeah, I mean, fall is the best time to try to control perennial broadleaf weeds, but I would still hold off until later this month or next month, or, you know, I say it every now and again, you know, one of the best results I ever had was on the 20th of November. It was misting and 45 degrees, and that area was clean until the following October. Got to use the right products, but you know, fall applications are definitely effective for perennial weeds.
Yes, the weather next week is something that I was going to mention, Dave. In many situations next week, it may be quite problematic to do more. It may be more appropriate next week to do less. Forecast has temperatures in Columbus for 90 or above for at least 4 of the 5 days that I just saw. And I'm assuming Cincinnati is equally hot. Now, Cleveland, not quite as hot. We have a couple of days touching 90 in the forecast. But the point would still stand. If you decide you need to water heavily next week, that may be counterintuitive to what you need to do, purely because moisture levels and heat like that, if humidity is there, would lead to an increased potential for disease, and particularly on those newly seeded areas. So you have a quandary of how much water is enough. It's going to require caution. The problem will be whether the humidity gets up or not. I haven't looked closely enough to see whether that's there. Higher humidity levels, definitely be careful with the water. If the humidity drops and it's dry air, then indeed water is going to be needed. So this is where sometimes the art of managing grass takes over the scientific component of it. Other things, we've seen an increased amount of activity in dollar spot. That'll obviously be suppressed next week. And a little bit of rust starting to pop up on ryegrasses in certain locations. Other things to make mention of, 12th of September, we have the OSFMA Field Day up at the Hall of Fame in Canton. Take a look in your emails, OTF website for registration purposes. September 12th, not October 12th, September 12th. October 2nd and 9th are the 2 scholarship golf outings. October 2nd is at the Country Club, Muirfield Village, with Rodney Robbins. And on the 9th, we're at Fairlawn with Mark Connor. And both of those are raising funds for student scholarships. If you have the opportunity to come out and help us, that would be greatly appreciated. If you have the ability to sponsor and get involved in some other form, then that is going to be equally appreciated as well. With that, we will wrap it up. We will hope that nobody melts next week. It is going to require caution and a little bit of practice and care. Hopefully we don't get large scale disease outbreaks, because that certainly is going to be a potential problem for next week. All right, with that, we say thank you. We'll talk to you all next week. Next week, in all likelihood, depending on the amount of death and destruction we get on our turf, will probably be the last of the weekly ones for the season. But if there is need, we can continue on a little bit further, but then we will get into a bi-weekly approach. Remember, we're available on buckeyeturf.osu.edu. We have the podcast, and we also have YouTube, and we will be putting information out on the Reddit lawn care section. Thank you, Dr. Shetlar and Dr. Gardner, and Dr. Carr. I want to step away.